Turn my headphones up. Nothing gonna stop me now. Nothing, baby. I'm here now. We here. It's your world. Yeah. Yo, all I need is one mic, one beat, one stage, one person front, my face on the front page. Only if I had one love, one girl and one crib, one God to show me how to do things in sun.
I was born by the river in a little tent. Like the river I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gonna come.
I say I know who you are. Yeah, I say I know who you are. Yeah, yeah, come on. We stiff neck, we wild, we on the corner, wildin' out. We ignorant, we proud, rebellious. I know who you.
Luke 24 and 44 through 4. To them, these are the words which I spake unto you while I was yet with prophets. And in the song concerning me, 45, then open he their understanding, that they might understand the scripture.
Keep his commandments on purpose. Precepts of the word be lining up. Kingdom come, it's gonna be word. History of the word be lining up. We really suffering these curses. Precepts of the word be lining up. Your father got your name word. Father got your name lining up.
Precepts line them up, Joel shine them up. Scandalous evangelists and Pharisees, time is up. Remnant in remembrance, scriptures just reminded us. Saturday the Sabbath kept holy by the righteous ones.
What rights do people have, and where do they come from? Who gets to make decisions for others, and on what authority? And how can we organize society to meet people's needs? These questions challenged an entire nation during the upheaval of the French Revolution. By the end of the 18th century, Europe had undergone a profound intellectual and cultural shift known as the Enlightenment. Philosophers and artists promoted reason and human freedom over tradition and religion. The rise of a middle class and printed materials encouraged political awareness, and the American Revolution had turned a former English colony into an independent republic. Yet France, one of the largest and richest countries in Europe, was still governed by an ancient regime of three rigid social classes called estates. The monarch, King Louis XVI, based his authority on divine right and granted special privileges to the first and second estates, the Catholic clergy and the nobles. The third estate, middle-class merchants and craftsmen, as well as over 20 million peasants, had far less power. And they were the only ones who paid taxes, not just to the king, but to the other estates as well. In bad harvest years, taxation could leave peasants with almost nothing, while the king and nobles lived lavishly on their extracted wealth. But as France sank into debt due to its support of the American Revolution and its long-running war with England, change was needed. King Louis appointed Finance Minister Jacques Necker, who pushed for tax reforms and won public support by openly publishing the government's finances. But the king...
So you gotta realize, okay, this is Francisco Perez. Welcome to my another educational lesson. But here we go. We found out that the American Indian is an Afro person. Okay? We found out that the people who came with these Europeans were Afro people or copper-colored people. And then they were in agreement, and somehow their inheritance or their part of the agreement was suspended, and the Europeans, so-called Europeans, took the power. And then we learned that in actuality, the European and different monarchies in that part of the world were of people called dukes and duchesses. And these dukes and duchesses were of Afro color, or Afro hair, and copper colored skin. And we learned that up until recently that these people were Afro, and that somehow in the last couple 100 years this has changed, because growing up in the American education system, we learned that all of these kings and different monarchies we learn are of white, pale people, meaning palish, Caucasian, reddish, who we would label Europeans today, right? But that's not the truth. So when did all of these things occur? And when we see what had happened, we see that they were sent here and they ended up conquering our Afro nations, our copper-colored race nations, tribes, and decided that with the power that they have grown to, why stay in power? So what happened was they went back and they conquered their monarchies and overthrew their monarchies that they had ruling over them. Remember, they're the poor people. They're the they're the regular class that was having a hard time living, right? Weren't they all upset? So we must understand that these Europeans that we call Europeans, like Benjamin Franklin, he just came from Europe, and he came to America, where my forefathers are from, and conquered our copper-colored races. And he said, and he had direct interaction with France, and he was actually part guilty of the revolution himself, the French Revolution, of being a part of it. He also bankrupted through the American Revolution. He bankrupted French. Yeah. So they learned from America and said, well, look, we don't have to have these people rule over us, right? Why should we let these people rule over us? So they end up, we hear about these revolutions where, oh, they hated monarchies, they wanted the monarchy gone, these evil monarchies. And when you hear of my mother's culture, the Hawaiian culture, that's the same thing that in uneducated people that have no experience with the history of Hawaii would say, because of that's what they were taught. They would say, oh, this evil Hawaiians is ruling over all the lands, you know, owning everything and just giving little to everyone. But in actuality, no one was ever homeless. No one starved. There was enough food for you to eat 10 times as much. It was just the most beautiful, and you were well taken care of. There was a government of laws that kept it moral. But when you hear from the Europeans, they say, no, evil chiefs, they rule everything. They own everything. So, the same thing happened in France, where, oh no, these chiefs, they rule, these monarchies ruling everything, taking all the money. Oh, we gotta get rid of this and pull democracy. We need democracy. When we think of democracy, we say popular government ruling over the people. Of the people ruling. But in actuality, it's popular, it's the government ruling over the people. When we think of it, we think of the people ruling, picking who they want to rule. When in actuality, it's government. Here, let me pull this up for you. Let me get into it. So we look etymology. The thing is, the words we use. Strength implies that the man must take the responsibility for choosing his rulers and representatives. Okay? So we have to sort through these. All of these is connected to the word democracy. Okay? So let's pull up democracy. There we go. This is from the 1570s. Okay? Means democratie. From the 14th century, from medieval Latin, demokratia. 13th century from Greek, demokratia, means popular government. From demos, meaning common people. So originally district, so it meant common people, or the common people in a specific district. Kratos means rule or strength, so it means popular government to rule over the common people, meaning like an aristocracy. like a monarchy, right? So, what we think it's the people choosing the government, but in actuality, it's a popular government that rules over the common people. Okay. So, I'm here to say that since the fall of Rome, since Rome's hardship, these people who we call the barbarians kept conquering the different lands in Europe and then losing the lands. Okay? Conquering the lands, losing the lands, conquering the lands, losing the lands. If we look at so to about what we would know as the French Revolution in the 1700s, that copper-colored people still retained the power in Europe, in France. And at the time of the French Revolution, they were all sought out, overthrown, and the guillotine was used to decapitate them. Okay, so if we look at the TV show Vikings, Athelstan, History Channel. So if we look at the Vikings, and we see this character called Athelstan, and if we look at history, we know Athelstan was an important European figure, and we know it was actually named. It wasn't spelled Athelstan; it was spelled Aethelstan. If we look right here, I think I have a picture of it. This is Athelstan. So if you look at Athelstan, his name is spelled A-E. What we don't realize is that was a Greek practice, and that actually spelled out you were an Afro, okay? That showed that you were of Afro origin. So anytime you seen AE in front of a people group, that was the time when they were still of a copper-colored people. Okay. So if we look at Athelstan, we see that the Vikings, who we considered the barbarians at this point, came and conquered Europe, and they'd leave, came back, they always was trying to get land and put a foothold in. We didn't realize that they're actually showing us some history when it comes to that, where they're showing us a part of their history. Okay, so if you read books, like right now I'm on a book called Barbarian Invasion. So it shows how at different times they came into Europe and then was eventually pushed out. I mean, all the way throughout Charlemagne, you know what I mean? Throughout the time periods. And if we read about France, at the time of the French Revolution, it was like kind of like a Babylonian system where there was many different nations. It wasn't just a one people group. They was living cohesion together. So when you look at Napoleon, right? Napoleon was a lower officer, and say you were short, you would say European, and your higher ups, your monarchies was of these copper colored people, and you were ridiculed and teased for how short you was, how fat you was, how not great you was. So at this moment, he bites at the opportunity to destroy the monarchy and the rulers who have copper colored skin, and take the empire and be the emperor. If we look at one of his famous quotes, and we got to remember when he went to Egypt, what did he do to the Sphinx? He cut the nose off. Like, so he really had a disdain for his copper colored rulers. So if we look at Napoleon, they have like quotes like this: "My decision to destroy the authority of blacks in Saint Dominique, Haiti, is not so much based on consideration of commerce and money, as on the need to block forever the march of the blacks in the world." Now you must understand, we're stating that the generals in his army, the French army, was black, what we consider black. Even though black etymology means pale. So we're not black, we're brown people, we're people of color. Yeah, so the people of color, that he had a disdain for them, that ruled over him, the generals and everything. And he helped in toppling his monarchy. And what do we understand today? We understand that many of these different wars that the Europeans of different European countries were involved in were with Indians of America, which were Afro or copper colored. So now we see a bigger picture on why Napoleon was here warring, or he just really did not like the copper color, and he wanted to make as of the need to block forever the march of the blacks in the world. So let's continue. So just like we've seen, the Europeans came through and conquered, got kicked off, came back. We know that the Europeans that we consider in this period was not European. Okay, now if we look at pictures, then we can see that this is the Louis de Rouvreau, Duke of Saint Simon, 1675 to 1755. So you must understand, if this is 1755 and the the French Revolution happened in 17 and the French Revolution happened 1789. Look, I mean, come on, look. 1789, the French Revolution was carried forward by Napoleon during the later expansion of the French Empire. The revolution overthrew the monarchy, the copper-colored monarchy, established a republic, experienced violent periods of political turmoil, and finally culminated in the dictatorship under Napoleon that rapidly brought many of its principles to Western Europe and beyond. Inspired by liberal and radical ideas, the revolutionary profoundly altered the course of modern history, and it did. If all the copper-colored races were ruling in different parts of the world, and this one act of the French Revolution gave them the power to establish the whole of Europe. Now you got to realize, at this time, France was powerful, right? When you look at the kings of Europe, they're of a French background. Many of them are French that rule in Europe. We see this throughout all the European movies. When they speak of the Europeans who are monarchies, they say he's a French European king. They've said this many of times. So if you read upon France, that their rulership was much wider than what we consider French today. And when you say empire, that means many different nations. So it changed a lot. And what since then we were educated through whitewashing images and history that totally took away this idea of a rulership of copper-colored people throughout the world, right? Then what do they tell you? They tell you you're just a slave. You're just a savage. You're a savage. That's all you are, a savage. And then you don't realize the history you come from. And we see it in this court ruler. French court rules. Native white French do not exist. So they're over here telling you that they have an extraordinary amount of evidence that proves that the people who we consider the French people today, who are of a pale complexion, are not the people of France. That they're not the indigenous people of France, and that they were invaders who conquered and became the French. So does this sound like the barbarian story? Like, what were the barbarians? What did they call Genghis Khan's barbarian tribe? They called them the Horde. They called it the Golden Horde. What we don't realize is because they had golden hair, of a barbarian background. So these people went and conquered France. And these people today, this rapper and sociologist, gathered the evidence and presented it to a court. And this court, using this evidence, ruled that yes, they are not the people of France, and that there are a conquering nation who assumed the identity of France. As we can see right here, to 1755, this man, look at his hair, look at my hair, go look at African American women, go look at Polynesian women, Polynesian men, and you see this hair. You see the hair. This hair, that's why when we watch European movies, they always show these Europeans wearing wigs. Saying, oh yeah, they just wore wigs, they love to wear wigs. No, they just like the Jewish people today who curl their hair to imitate my natural springs. These people are just trying to imitate us because they just assumed our identity. Like, they now all white people are Cherokee. How they assumed our identity, which the Cherokee is not even a mongoloid people. It is an Afro-copper-colored people. But yet, we have every white person in the world that you meet saying, oh, that's from America. Says, yeah, I'm part Cherokee. And I'm Cherokee. You look up all of the Cherokee chiefs today, they're all Caucasoids. So they come in and they assume the identity, and that's where we get the story of the $5 Indians. When they had did this doll rolls list, they would bribe the people creating the list, and for $5 you could place your name on this Indian list, showing you have tribal heritage. Yeah. Born in Paris to a family of ancient nobility. So if this guy is Afro, copper colored, and he's from a family of ancient nobility, and these ancient monarchies was conquered by these modern day Europeans, then it's plain as day. These copper colored races ruled in Europe and was toppled by their mercenary armies and foreign populations. Look at Hawaii. The same thing happened with Hawaii. We was a monarchy. We let foreign populations move into Hawaii. Okay? We were ruling over them. Eventually they got frustrated with this and made their own plots to become the rulers. Eventually they toppled our monarchy and ushered their own republic. And then eventually through negotiations made this connected Hawaii to their corporation America, right? And now they rule over Hawaiians through specific families who you can track through history through different associations and aliases that they own many of the lands, especially the crown lands, and they have buildings all over these temples and pyramids, and they have schools all over these temples. So just like in Hawaii, they did that to France right before they came to Hawaii. Right? In Hawaii they say they came for exploration, yet they had two of the greatest warships fully docked with Navy SEALs, with Marines, the top fighting companies. They did not come for peace. When they say peace, they meant war. So just like less than 50 years ago, they took their leaders' land and monarchies and instituted their own new worlds, right? What do we hear about it during this time? Like new reformations was happening, new governments, new monarchies. That's what they did. They conquered. Then as soon as they got a stronghold over their countries, they started coming out and continuing their assimilation of all of the monarchies of the copper-colored people. Right? He was educated a gentleman and was a musketeer at age 16. Why do you think we all like gravitate to these movies and these histories, like the Musketeers, right? One for all and all for one, or all for one and one for all, right? What did they call how were the Musketeers? They had our personalities. We don't realize when we hear knights, that's a copper-colored person in shield. What did they call the musketeer? D'Artagnan, which means dark tan man. He entered the service of Philip, Duke of Orleans. Why do you think we like these teams like New Orleans and this history and this style and this and that? Certain things, certain Christian beliefs, certain Mother Nature beliefs, certain goddess beliefs, certain Son of God beliefs, the Virgin Mary. Because we come from some specific people in our communities that look similar to us, may have came from these societies where they inherently gravitate to those concepts. Saint Simon gives up this portrait of Philip, who was a homosexual. You see how because he's of a copper-colored race, of an Afro people, that they have to tarnish his name with this this accusations of homosexuality, right? Don't they always say that? King James, we learn he's copper colored, he's of an Afro race. What do they say about him? Oh, he's a homosexual. But when we read about him, his wife lived in the castle, which many other kings did not practice. He had many children and wrote poems of love to his woman. Yet they want to stamp him as homosexual. Oh, Bill Cosby, he's a great man. Yeah, but he drugs, rapes women. Oh, this and that is a great man. Oh, yeah, but this and that. Yeah, whenever it's a people of copper color, they want to tarnish him. Monsieur was a little man. He always wore high-heeled shoes and was dressed up in a feminine way. You see how they're making him sound feminine? Even if this was true, what does that have to do with him being a duke, ruling in these lands, born in 1675 and dying in 1755? So you can't see, but down here has all the writing. You see it now, which I read. Okay. So if you continue on, you see right here is so for some reason unclear, the popes have moved their court to Avignon, France in the 1300s, where they once again came under the protection of the Frankish kings. But by 1376, the war between the Frankish kings Charles IV and the English had caused such an upheaval that Pope Gregory decided to move back to Rome. So like I've been saying, there have been wars and there have been lands been changing hands, but yet the Afro has stayed in power for the most part. All look 1300s, 1500s. So see a little. So what you must understand is that even if you could fight a case for them not being in power during the French Revolution, they were in power 50 years before that, less than 50 years before that. So you really don't have much of a case. I can show you going back 1,000 years prior, people like me ruling in Europe. And there's so much evidence that these things, like they say, you can't keep a secret a secret. It will eventually come to light. Right? Athelstan. AE. AE means Afro race. Right? Look, this is Mary, Queen of Scots, drawn while in mourning for her husband, Francis II, King of France. Look at her hair. You say, well, I see white people with this hair. But you're not taking into consideration ancient mixing, ancient relationships their forefathers and mothers had, which gave them these phenotypes. You know what I mean? You don't understand that not every white person is the same, and that the different colors of the hair, the different facial features tell of a story of how they became who they are. And some of this is because of intermixing. And we don't realize that's where a lot of these phenotypes, that these, who we call Caucasians, where they get it from, why it exists in them. If we look at we look here, then we see that these 10 tribes of barbarians, they came into and they became, sorry about that, one second.
Myself in the midst of the land, that I should set my name.
So they became the Germans. We see in what's the book? Nature knows no color line. We see that the ancient shields and the different artwork of the different countries like Germany was of a copper colored people of Afro origins. Many of these were of Afro people. So now we understand that the reason why they're not is because a specific tribe, or 10 tribes of barbarians, the Alemanni, the Burgundies, the Franks, right? We know the people of France to be the French. But every time in history, this word, the Frankish, Franks, are being thrown in. What we don't realize is this this is the ancient name of that barbarian tribe. And they try to interject it to confuse you. Because now you don't realize what they're talking about. Are they talking about the barbarian Franks? Or are they talking about the French, the real French, the Afro-French? What are they talking about? So this here just further confuses you, right? The Italians are the Lombards. The English are the Saxons, right? And if you look at the Sueva is the Portuguese, and the Visigoth is the Spanish. And then here we see that that the Herulu are extinct, the Ostrogoths are extinct, and who we they call the Vandals are extinct. Okay. So let's get back into it. So this guy, he's saying that he appointed, okay,
Minister Jacques Necker.
so now I'm saying that this is an Afro man, copper-colored man, and we at this time we've established that France was of many different people. Barbarians lived there. They had intermixed and they had lived amongst them and had adapted like many different foreign people that they move in their land. They were a certain way, a cultural way, and eventually now their children are Americanized. So this person was from is from another country, yet he came here to France and became appointed finance minister. Okay, if we look at him, this guy is called Jacques Necker. All right, Jacques Necker was a native of Prussia. Okay, now we know Prussia is of an Afro people as well, right? The Holy Roman Army. This is before they became the White Romans. They're still copper colored. Okay. Jacques Necker was sent to Paris in 1747 to become a clerk in the bank of Isaac Vernet. So what we don't realize, his family has a lot of connections in the banking. When we read and learn about the specific families that do banking, we realize that their forefathers set up these banking institutions, and then they send their children out to different banking to eventually take over and own these banks and run these banks. And today, that's where they get their grasp how widespread their reign, their reach is through honing in, pushing their children in the direction in order to consolidate these different avenues in the banking industry. Okay, so if we look if we keep going, then we realize that this guy is really sketchy. Like, he was trained and pushed into this job in order to destroy the monarchy and destroy the economy. If we look in America, we see a lot of them being instituted into the army and eventually destroying the economy and displacing everything. So if we look at Madame Necker, encouraged her husband to try to find himself a public position. He accordingly became a syndicate or director of the French East India Company. Now here we go. Now we know that the French East India Company and all of these different India companies, like King James's, were all corporations aligning themselves in order to destroy their Afro cousins in the other parts of the world. Okay, so we already see this connection. Now when we go down, we see that he has a brother. Okay, his brother's name is Louis Necker. The elder brother of statesman Jack Necker, Louis Necker, studied mathematics at the Academy of Geneva. You see all this Geneva comes up. He finishes his studies in philosophy with a thesis on electricity, then graduated in law. He later was appointed governor of the Princes of Nassau. Now we all know that Nassau was this great African American stronghold where the pirates, the Moorish pirates, was trying to make a country out of it, and was eventually toppled by the European, British army, navy, right? Managed a boarding school for young English held by his father, Charles Frederick, lawyer and professor of law at the Geneva Academy. In 1752, he purchased John Jalabert Physics Laboratory, and in 1757, acceded the chair of mathematics and the honorary chair of experimental physics of the Academy of Geneva. In 1761, he was, however, forced to resign after a scandal of private nature, the Vernes Necker case, and took refuge in Paris, where he joined the Girardot and Haller bankers in the Girardot Bank. See, so now he's this great in Geneva, Academy of Geneva, and now he goes to Paris, where his brother is just about to topple the monarchy in France, right? And becomes a banker. And is the monarchy good for the bank, or is the monarchy bad for the bank, right? Because the bank doesn't want to share with the monarchy, right? So it's better if we get rid of monarchies, right? Now all the bankers are making extreme amounts of money in Hawaii because there's no monarchy to protect that resource, right? He also was the correspondent of the Académie Royale des Sciences from 1756 to 1767. He founded the trading house in Marseille, and as a result, changes caused by the French Revolution, he thought it prudent to return to his homeland in 1791. The disgrace of his younger brother, Jacques, contributed especially to the decision. So his brother's treachery toppled the government, and he was implicated. We're gonna find out he was implicated before everything happened, before the king was eventually killed. So his family name was tarnished, and they were now looking at that Necker as insurgents. So he went back to where he came from. They'll say it's the disgrace of his younger brother. Jacques contributed especially to this decision. But we don't realize how deep this spiderweb goes. Okay? So let's continue.
Who pushed for tax reforms and won public support by openly publishing the government's finances. But
isn't that some tactics we would do today? Oh, let's publish this and that, right, to destroy them, right? And the whole time, you're the finance minister. Your people like you are running this different. Don't we realize that people in the government, sometimes they get greedy. And they extort from the government. And this, when this is learned about, then you can place the blame on anybody. A lot of times when monarchies is trying to be overthrown or that are not wanted, that you can create something to go to tarnish that monarchy or that president. And this was what they were using, and they were using the people against them. And we all know this was already a melting pot at different nations. We know that the Europeans and people of that background, they love to protest. We see a lot of times in this French Revolution, there was a high protest, using the mobs against them, right? Feeding them misinformation like they do today in the news. That's what it was. Rallying up the people against a monarchy in order to destroy it. When we see, now we can see history, we know that the people in France lived much better under their rule than they have ever lived since then. Because these bankers, they control everything now, and all they want is to give you hardships. Back then, they took a little bit off the top, but they made sure everybody was taken care of. And they told you that, oh, they're against you, so take them out and life will be better. Then when you eventually took them out, life wasn't better. In Iraq, they said, well, Saddam Hussein, all these different people, Gaddafi, all these people, they're not good for you. If you take them out, your life will get better. We killed all of these people, and our lives are not better. The economy is not better. Everything's worse. So they tell you different things to get you to work on your emotions, but it doesn't turn out the way you were told.
The king's advisors strongly opposed these initiatives. Desperate for a solution, the king called a meeting of the Estates General, an assembly of representatives from the three estates, for the first time in 175 years. Although the Third Estate represented 98% of the French population, its vote was equal to each of the other estates. And unsurprisingly, both of the upper classes favored keeping their privileges. Realizing they couldn't get fair representation, the Third Estate broke off, declared themselves the National Assembly, and pledged to draft a new constitution.
So you see how when we in America, they had a constitution that was good, better, and then the Europeans came and pushed away the Moors who had swindled the Afro-American out of their land. They pushed away the Moors and they said, no, we're going to take power and we're going to write a new constitution. And then they wrote another constitution, wrote two new constitutions, which we don't even realize, right? In Hawaii, when they took over Hawaii, right? Before they took over Hawaii, we had a constitution. They made us rewrite the constitution. Then Queen Liliuokalani tries to institute a new constitution, and she gets overthrown. And then the Republic of Hawaii, the European businessmen, i.e. so-called European businessmen, they institute a new constitution that's even worse than the constitution they instituted before them, right? Which benefit the corporations and not the people.
With or without the other estates, King Louis ordered the First and Second Estates to meet with the National Assembly, but he also dismissed Necker, his popular finance minister. In response,
you see how he dismissed Necker? So, see, he was his the plot Necker had was found out. So he was dismissed. So his brother knew already. Our cover's blown. Now we gotta go. Let's go back to Prussia. Okay.
months, thousands of outraged Parisians joined with sympathetic soldiers to storm the Bastille prison, a symbol of royal power and a large storehouse of weapons.
So what did these mercenaries and people not in rulership lusting to have power, what they do? They came near, took all your weapons, your storehouse of weapons, and came after you.
The revolution had begun. As rebellion spread throughout the country, the feudal system was abolished. The Assembly's Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen proclaimed a radical idea for the time: that individual rights and freedoms were fundamental to human nature, and government existed only to protect them. Their privileges gone, many nobles fled abroad, begging foreign rulers to invade France and restore order.
See, so these copper-colored monarchies, they left and went to Austria and these different Prussia and different countries to the north, and demanded that they help get in line their ordinary people, who we would call like Europeans today, that were the bottom class, who were foreigners who came and lived in the country or was being suppressed, but they were living good, eating well, being taught, educated. Said, can you please get my country back, restore order?
And while Louis remained as the figurehead of the constitutional monarchy, he feared for his future. In 1791, he tried to flee the country, but was caught. The attempted escape shattered people.
So what you don't realize is, just like in Hawaii, what they do, they topple the government, imprison the monarchy, right? Liliuokalani was in jail. She was in jail and she couldn't leave, right? So just like him, he was being held hostage, like a figurehead, till they can establish their rule. And he tried to leave and was caught. Okay.
People's faith in the king. The royal family was arrested, and the king charged with treason. After a trial, the once revered king was publicly beheaded, signaling the end of 1,000 years of monarchy and finalizing the September 21st.
So, after he died, and it was the end of the monarchy and became the French Republic, the first French Republic. Queen Liliuokalani has been overthrown, and these Europeans destroy the monarchy and institute Hawaii's first republic. You hear the resemblance. They've done this all over, even in America, right? They destroyed America, and then they destroyed America, and then they instituted the American Republic, right? The first republic of America, right? What do we say today? We say, bring back the republic, right? Europeans, they say, bring back the republic. That's why it's like this, because we're not a republic anymore, right? You gotta listen to them. Like, a lot of this shit is bullshit, but there is something to a lot of what they say, and you gotta pay attention, because they're teaching you when they're trying to miseducate you, and you gotta be smart enough to catch this. And we are smart enough. We just have to use our mind and see what we've been taught.
Declaration of the First French Republic, governed by the motto Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité. 9 months later, Queen Marie Antoinette, a foreigner long mocked as Madame Deficit for her extravagant reputation, was executed as well. But the
so right here, they're executing everybody, right? They're trying to execute them all, right? So we look at, let's see if I got any more of that pictures. So hold on one second. So if you look at Antoinette, I have better pictures. I gotta find them. You see her hair. You see how if we look at the recent sculpture of Martin Luther King, he was a copper-colored man, and how did they present his sculpture in white alabaster? So you gotta realize the tactic they use, right? So now, 100, 400 years from now, they're gonna say Martin Luther King was a white man, and we're the great civil makers, civil rights makers. This is what they do, and we're falling for it. So they took out her, right? Because we look at all of these different Mary Queen of Scots, you know, all Afro people, right? So they're trying to get rid of everybody of royalty. What did they do in America, in Hawaii, at the time after Kamehameha was murdered, right? There was still another 80 years of rulership by my people. What they do during that 80 years? They killed every single nobility, especially the young men. Some of the women was kept alive, which they eventually married off and amalgamated with the Europeans. Many a banker status, which didn't even love these women, just used them for their house, for their seat, their status, right? So they was going around trying to take out all the nobility in France. So that, because if we look at history, especially through the books, the barbarians, you see that these Europeans, they tried to take power before, these so-called Europeans, but our people retained the power, or came back and was able to retake the land, right? So they wanted to make sure that no one, what do we see in movies, right? When someone kills someone's father, mother, and the child is alive, they kill the child, right? Because they say, well, the child's gonna grow up to kill you. It's gonna grow up and come after you. Right? So they don't want anybody to come back and have claim and say, hey, no, we're those people. We're gonna take power again. That's why you see in the book Africans and Native Americans by Jack Forbes, you see that when they came prior to the slave trade in the 1400s to South America, they were taking the monarchies of that area and bringing them to Europe. And after they had toppled their own rulers, like these people we're reading about today, whoever they did not kill, they brought to America in order to remove them from their power, their lands, so they can gather people for another revolt and take back their lands. Right? Wanted to get a strong hold on this, so they never come back. Okay. So if you look at this, you see a little bit of Afro in this one. And I see a lot of different Polynesian. second. So if you look right here, you see how, see the look? You see the look? See? Pearls and everything. You see, this is, this, I don't know just yet. Like, this is really hard to take. Oh, this is really hard to take, but if you look at the Pope, I'm trying to find something right now, because when we look at Helen Ainsley's book and we read what Benjamin Franklin wrote, his quote that he has in the book, if we can find this real fast, give me a second. I'm almost there. So yeah, so let's watch another video. Go past it.
This is Crash Course World History, and today we're going to talk about the French Revolution. Admittedly, this wasn't the French flag until 1794, but we just felt like he looked good in stripes. As does this guy, huh? So while the American Revolution is considered a pretty good thing, the French Revolution is often seen as a bloody, anarchic mess. And Mr. Green, I bet like always it's way more complicated than that. Actually, no, it was pretty terrible. Also, like a lot of revolutions, in the end, it exchanged an authoritarian regime for an authoritarian regime. But even if the revolution was a mess, its ideas changed human history far more, I will argue, than the American Revolution. Right, so France in the 18th century was a rich and populous country, but it had a systemic problem collecting taxes because of the way its society was structured. They had a system with kings and nobles we now call the Ancien Régime. Thank you, 3 years of high school French. And for most French people, it sucked, because the people with the money, the nobles and the clergy, never paid taxes. So by 1789, France was deeply in debt thanks to their funding the American Revolution. Thank you, France. We will get you back in World Wars I and II. And
so you see how we see that King James was a European king of Afro origins, a duke, right? We know in the Bible it says that the dukes were of Afro origins. They were cousins to other Afro peoples, right? So we know that they're sending these Europeans here to war with us, but they were Afro people who was rulership of Europe. Okay? That's where you get Jamestown and all this stuff. So let's hear what he said again.
Thanks to their funding the American Revolution. Thank you, France. We will get you back in World War II.
So now you see that not only the King James, but the French, they funded, you know what I mean, a lot of this, the revolution. So you gotta see that different European Afro countries had a hand in the overthrow and the oppression of the Afro-American.
Wars 1 and 2, and King Louis XVI was spending half of his national budget to service the federal debt. Louis tried to reform this system under various finance ministers, even called for democracy on a local level, but all attempts to fix it failed, and soon France basically declared bankruptcy. This nicely coincided with hailstorms that ruined a year's harvest, thereby raising food prices and causing widespread hunger, which really made the people of France angry because they love to eat. Meanwhile, the king certainly did not look broke, as evidenced by his well-fed physique and fancy footwear. He and his wife Marie Antoinette also got to live in the very nice palace at Versailles thanks to God's mandate, but Enlightenment thinkers like Kant were challenging the whole idea of religion, writing things like, "The main point of enlightenment is of man's release from his self-caused immaturity, primarily in matters of religion." So basically, the peasants were hungry, the intellectuals were beginning to wonder whether God could or should save the king, and the nobility were dithering about eating foie gras and songbirds, failing to make meaningful financial reform. In response to the crisis, Louis XVI called a meeting of the Estates General, the closest thing that France had to a national parliament, which hadn't met since 1614. The Estates General was like a super parliament made up of representatives from the first estate, the nobles, the second estate, the clergy, and the third estate, everyone else. The third estate showed up with about 600 representatives. The first and second estates both had about 300, and after several votes, everything was deadlocked, and then the third estate was like, you know what, forget you guys. We're gonna leave, and we're gonna become our own National Assembly. This did not please King Louis XVI, so when the new National Assembly left the room for a break, he locked the doors, and he was like, sorry guys, you can't go in there, and if you can't assemble, how are you gonna be a National Assembly? Shockingly, the third estate representatives were able to find a different room in France, this time an indoor tennis court where they swore the famous tennis court oath, and they agreed not to give up until a French constitution was established. So then Louis XVI responded by sending troops to Paris, primarily to quell uprisings over food shortages, but the revolutionaries saw this as a provocation. So they responded by seizing the Bastille prison on July 14th, which coincidentally is also Bastille Day. The Bastille was stormed ostensibly to free prisoners, although there were only 7 in jail at the time, but mostly to get guns. But the really radical move in the National Assembly came on August 4th, when they abolished most of the Ancien Regime. Feudal rights, tithes, privileges for nobles, unequal taxation, they were all abolished in the name of writing a new constitution. And then on August 26th, the National Assembly proclaimed the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, which laid out a system of rights that applied to every person and made those rights integral to the new constitution. That's quite different from the American Bill of Rights, which...
And you see how they did this in America, you see how they did this in Europe, the Magna Carta, they did all these different stuff in order to give themselves power too, right? Then in America, they never have any ruling power. They never have any foot to stand on. And then they eventually wrote themselves in, right? Then the agreement said they're not going to rule the Indian, and the Indian won't rule the white person. But what is it happens today? They rule over us, right?
Which was like begrudgingly tacked on at the end and only applied to non-slaves. The Doromac, as I called it in high school, declared that everyone had the right to liberty, property, and security. Rights that the French Revolution would do an exceptionally poor job of protecting. But as noted last week, the same could be argued for many other supposedly more successful revolutions. Okay, let's go to the thought bubble. Meanwhile, back at Versailles, Louis XVI was still King of France, and it was looked...
So, like, what you don't realize is, if you read, then you'll see that it's a lot different than what we think it is. So let's look here. In this book, Helen Ainsley's book, the 12 Colonies, it says, in the year 1664, there were 7,000 Dutchmen, besides the real Dutch, Prussians, Bohemians, French, Swedes, Norwegians, Danes, and 5,000 English, including the Scot, Welsh, and Irish. He later on says, can I prove that these people were black? Yes, I can. See Benjamin Franklin's essay, America as the Land of Opportunity, from 1751. In this he says, why should the Palatine Moors be suffered to swarm into our settlements? They will never adopt our customs any more than they can obtain our complexion. So now he's stating a difference. They're a different complexion than he is. All of Africa, Asia, and America are swarthy, meaning black. Swarthy, meaning a brownish, darkish color, which we label black. Russia, Italy, Spain, France, Swedes, and the Germans are black. The principal whites are made up of the Saxons and the English. The Scots, Welsh, and Irish are not Saxon or English. When Benjamin Franklin writes this essay in 1751, the black German king, George II, is sitting on the throne of England. So here we go. Here we just looked at one that stated this so-called black nobility died at 1755 and was in France. Now we're stating that in 1751, the black German king was sitting on the throne of England, and that only the Saxon and English are white people.
Looking like France might be a constitutional monarchy, which might have meant that the royal family could hang on to their awesome house. But then, in October of 1789, a rumor started that Marie Antoinette was hoarding grain somewhere inside the palace, and in what became known as the Women's March, a bunch of armed peasant women stormed the palace and demanded that Louis and Marie Antoinette move from Versailles to Paris, which they did because everyone is afraid of armed peasant women. And this is a nice reminder that to many people at the
in America, they've destroyed the food, the agriculture. Right? We don't have enough food. And what? Aren't we all coming in an uproar against the government? They're trying to lead it to a civil war, a civil disruption. Isn't that what they did in France?
The king was necessary for a functioning state, and they were mainly concerned that the voters and office holders be men of property. Only the most radical wing, the Jacobins, called for the creation of a republic. But things were about to get much more revolutionary, and also worse for France. First, the Jacobins had a huge petition drive that got a bit unruly, which led troops controlled not by the king, but by the National Assembly, to fire on the crown, killing 50 people, and that meant that the National Assembly, which had been the revolutionary voice of the people, had killed people in an attempt to rein in revolutionary fervor.
So, see, it says had killed people in an attempt to rein in revolutionary fervor. What do we see today? We see false flags where people are actually murdered in order to rein in revolutionary fervor, right? To attack different groups in order to rein in revolutionary fervor, right? The more things change, the more they stay the same. If you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat your past.
You see this a lot throughout history during revolutions. What looked like radical hope and change suddenly becomes the man as increasingly radical ideas are embraced. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Meanwhile, France's monarchical neighbors were getting a little nervous about all this republic business, especially Leopold II, who in addition to being the not holy, not Roman, and not imperial Holy Roman Emperor, was Marie Antoinette's brother. I should note, by the way, that at this point the Holy Roman Empire was basically just Austria. Also, like a lot of monarchs, Leopold II liked the idea of monarchies, and
you see how old. And I can pull this guy's image up. It's of an Afro person. I remember this image. But you guys see how Austria, right? What you don't realize in my next video is that the people who instituted the French Revolution instituted the revolution in Austria and Prussia and ended up conquering those copper-colored people. And you learn from in the French Revolution, the monarchies went north to those lands and tried to take refuge in those lands and asked for military help from those lands, who just so happened was conquered by those barbarian tribes that took a foothold in France, the bankers. And now all of those lands are controlled by those bankers, those aristocracies, which were the bankers and the normal people who became and assumed the roles of these monarchies and aristocrats. That's why today you see a bunch of white people say, yeah, I'm related to King Louis, King Leopold, King George, King James. Yet they have no lineage to them, but they might. What it is they're the people who assumed identity, or the people who killed them took on. Those are the descendants of those people. At the very least, they could have been amalgamations where breeding back into non-Afro races and end up losing the phenotypes or the look. Because sometimes the phenotypes is present, yet because of the look, meaning the light skin or the hair type, we don't see the connection genetically between the ancestors. But sometimes there is. But this is totally different. This was a whitewashing. When you realize the Renaissance period translates to the whitewashing, where they got Michelangelo, Leonardo, all of these people, they got them to redraw and resculpture all of these paintings and sculptures in order to fool you in modern history. That's why a lot of the different stuffs we see are more recent, not ancient. Because the more ancient things tell a different story.
Wanted to keep his job as a person who gets to stand around wearing a dress.
If you look in Hawaii, so we put Hawaii natives, okay? We'll put this in here. So, if you look at Hawaii natives, and show like, see like this, you see the modern look after many generations of immigration in order to change the look, the incarceration, enslavement of the males, the using the bioweapons recorded by the Dutch and Spanish to kill off us, how they killed the male nobilities in Hawaii in order to change the dynamic, because it's the father seed, right? So this is what you see. Kamehameha schools, this is students, so they have to have Hawaiian. See, Hawaiian girl is Fern and Kauai. You see the look? See? Now if you look right here, it's my grandma. This is my great grandma. Okay? Wait. I don't know what just happened. One second. So there, this is my great grandma. You see her? That's what Hawaiians look like. That's what Hawaiians look like. She was usually lighter skinned than that, but at this time she was already retired. She was in the garden every single day because she just loves to garden. She just loves plants. She loves nature. Loves farming. She'll be down there. We wash clothes and we hang our clothes on the clothesline in the garden. So she was down there hours, and when we stay in the sun, we become dark brown and even purple. And today we're not in the sun a lot. We're working a lot. We're not in the sun at the peak hours. We're not in the different geoengineering has created a different atmosphere for us as well. Many of the things we do are inside. So unlike our ancestors, we're dark, but we're not as dark as we should be. Okay? So she was a little lighter skinned than this, but at this time she was super dark. So this is Hawaiians. This is what Hawaiian looks like. So you see through. Her husband was a Portuguese man, but my grandma's father, my mom's father, my grandpa, is an Afro-Hawaiian. So that's why my mom is like so Hawaiian, because even though her grandpa was Portuguese, her father and her mother having afros was strong to create the look my mother has, which is of a Polynesian look, super springy afro hair. She's copper colored skin. She has the Hottentot body. You can see the body of the Polynesian women, thick thighs, thick hips, the different body structure in the cranium. We have the shovel teeth, which is a trait of us. We're old blood. We all mostly have old blood, unless through mixing we were able to contaminate our blood. And some people have different bloods, but most Polynesians have old blood.
Pointing at nothing, owning winged lion monkeys made out of gold. And who can blame him? So he and King William Frederick II of Prussia together issued the Declaration of Pillnitz, which promised to restore the French monarchy. At this point, Louis and the National Assembly developed a plan. Let's invade Austria. The idea was to plunder Austria's wealth and maybe steal some Austrian grain to shore up French food supplies and also, spread revolutionary zeal. But what actually happened is that Prussia joined Austria in fighting the French. And then Louis encouraged the Prussians, which made him look like an enemy of the revolution, which of course he was. And as a result, the assembly voted to suspend the monarchy, have new elections in which everyone could vote, as long as they were men, and create a new republican constitution. Soon, this convention decided to have a trial for Louis XVI, who was found guilty, and
then you see that everybody votes, you guys all picking your leaders, and then they do what they want. And they say, well, you picked this, but in reality, they already knew who was going to rule, which is the barbarian family lineages that now rule as European kings. Right? You got to understand. You must understand this one simple fact, if this thing will load. One simple fact of the matter is,
by one vote, sentenced to die via guillotine, which made it difficult for Austria and Prussia to restore him to the throne. Oh, it's time for the open letter? An open letter to the guillotine. But first, let's see what's in the secret compartment today. Oh, there's nothing. Oh my god, Stan! Cheat! That's not funny! Dear Guillotine, I can think of no better example of Enlightenment thinking run amok. Dr. Joseph Guillotine, the inventor of the guillotine, envisioned it as an egalitarian way of dying. They said the guillotine was humane, and it also made no distinction between rich or poor, noble or peasant. It killed equally. You were also celebrated for taking the torture out of execution, but I will remind you, you did not—
You see how when you were in power, they're like, let's kill them equally. Poor, rich, noble, peasant. Kill them equally. Nowadays, they're a ruler. They're the nobility. Now, oh no, nobility shouldn't be killed. If you have $2,000, then you're good. If you have money, you can buy your way out of everything. If you have money, you can have a better prison cell. You hear? Oh no, it's not the same anymore. Now they're in rulership when they're doing these things. Huh? You see?
Not take the dying out of execution. Well, unfortunately for you, France hasn't executed anyone since 1977, but you'll be happy to know that the last legal execution in France was via guillotine. Plus, you always got a future in horror movies. Best wishes, John Green. The death of Louis XVI marks the beginning of the Terror, the best known, or at least the most sensational phase of the revolution. I mean, if you can kill the king, you can kill pretty much anyone, which is what the government did under the leadership of the Committee of Public Safety motto.
So they had the Committee of Public Safety motto, led by Maximilien Robespierre. They killed every nobility. Now, why are these Europeans stating that, oh, they come from this and that and this and that nobleman? If they killed everyone, right?
We suck at protecting public safety, led by Maximilien Robespierre. The Terror saw the guillotining of 16,000 enemies of the revolution, including Marie, I never actually said let them eat cake, Antoinette, and Maximilien Robespierre himself, who was guillotined in the month of Thermidor in the year 2. Oh right, so while France was broke and fighting like 9 wars, the Committee of Public...
So this Afro person who got them to rally up to conquer the monarchy, they say, oh, fuck, throw him in too, man. We ain't trying to get no Afro ruling over us.
Safety changed the measurements of time because, you know, the traditional measurements are so irrational and religion-y. So they renamed all the months and decided that each day would have 10 hours and each hour 100 minutes. And then after the Terror...
So you see how they change everything? Oh, 10 hours now, 100 minutes in an hour. You see how they're always turning things backwards. They're always changing things, turning them upside down.
Revolution pulled back a bit, and another new constitution was put into place, this one giving a lot more power to wealthy people. At this point, France was still at war with Austria and Britain, wars that France ended up winning, largely thanks to a little corporal named Napoleon Bonaparte. The war was backdrop to a bunch of coups and counter-coups that I won't get into right now because they were very...
See how Napoleon is the key? Well, why did Napoleon... What was Napoleon's mind state? Like, well, he had a general that he did not like ruling over him. He had a monarchy that he despised in power. What do you say? Well, we learn about Othello, right? We learn about Othello. Right? What was he? Well, he was a Venetian general. He was a general in the Venetian army. Okay? Moorish just means he was Afro. Okay? Doesn't absolutely mean that he was from the Moors. Okay? Whatever this alliance, bloodline, whatever it may be. We know he was a copper-colored general in the Venetian army, right? Which is under the control of France, right? Right? France, okay? The Republic of Venice, right? You look at the Republic of Venice. The Venetian city-state was founded as a safe haven for the people escaping persecution in mainland Europe after the decline of the Roman Empire. So after the Roman Empire was being captured by the barbarians, they would go to Venice as a safe haven, right? Venetian Navy was used in the Crusades, right? Where is the Holy Land? They say the Holy Land is in the naval, right? Naval of the world, where if you look at this, the naval of the world, it says is the capital of the Inca Empire, was situated as Cusco, high in the Andes. We know the Polynesians went back and forth to the Andes, even had settlements there. Tradition states the city was founded according to geomantic principles. Jerusalem, as the capital of the Holy Land, Jerusalem is called an earth navel. So Jerusalem is considered earth navel. Cusco, with its megaliths, is considered the earth's navel. So when they were going, every time we watch movies of them going on the Crusades, they jump on boats. Why? Because A lot of the Crusades was coming to America. Coming to America.
Complicated, but the West.
So if we look where we left off, right? Republic of Venice. If you look, we hear about Napoleon, okay? Napoleon, prominent during the French Revolution, led a very successful campaigns during the French Revolutionary War. He was the Emperor of the French from 1804 to 1814. Napoleon dominated European and global affairs for more than a decade while leading France against a series of coalitions in the Napoleonic Wars. These coalitions was of the other Afro peoples who they were trying to overthrow, right? We look at the Napoleonic Wars. You see European powers formed into various coalitions, right? Unresolved disputes associated with the French Revolution and resulting conflict, right? Chaotic republic, right? So we've seen this, we see all of this. And if you go into this, it gets a little deeper, but let's continue because it's getting late. So if we look at this is African Americans before Napoleon. The commander of the French army was a black man. So confirming that this Pathfinder Chronicles, General Alexander Dumas. Oh, shit. So if you look, Alexander Dumas was a tall, handsome, elegantly regal and black. His military exploits were legendary, and the much shorter Napoleon hated him so much that he sought to erase any reference to General Dumas from French history. So this guy was erased from history. Actually, Napoleon hated all black people because they defeated him in Haiti in their battle for independence. And it is speculated that he used a cannon to destroy the nose of the Sphinx in Egypt because his facial features were Negro. Alexander Dumas, commander-in-chief of the French army before the reign, all the nobility was looking like this. If the general looked like this, and they were overthrown, and now they all look like European. And this right here is the overthrow of the Afro people in France, which is where this comes into play. White genocide project. Court rules they're not the indigenous people, that copper colored people were indigenous. So General Alexander Dumas was the father of the famous French novelist Alexander Dumas, creator of the highly popular classic novels The Three Musketeers and The Count of Monte Cristo. His father, General Dumas, was the inspiration and model for his son's most famous swashbuckler heroes. So this man, his father, was the inspiration for a lot of these people we watching, these musketeers and other stories. So you can go further into that. I'm sure that we're going to put some kind of spin on it. But you and I know my decision to destroy the authority of the blacks in St. Dominic, Haiti is not so much based on consideration of commerce and money as on the need to block forever the march of blacks in the world. And we see Elector of Saxony, King of Europe, King James, Holy Roman Emperor Maria of Austria, Archduke of Austria, Jean Antoinette Leotard, Switzerland, more European woman, French-born Louis de Rivaux, Duke of Saint-Simon, Charles V, King of France, returns the sword of the High Constable to Bertrand de Grusselin, the history of this Revolution, whatever his name was. Athelstan, Maria Antoinette, or Queen of Scots. Her husband was Francis II, King of France. And we can go on and on. Alright, so we're gonna close it up. It's been amazing. I pray you learned something here.
Easygoing, seductive, and has undetected chlamydia. Date.
I am that I am.